Let's talk about racism, social activism, and mindfulness. Hey, welcome back to the series. I'm Alicia. If you're new or don't know me or finding the channel through this video, I want to welcome you here. Typically, this is not the kind of content that I make, but it was important to me to make this video, so I welcome you and thank you for joining. 2020 was hard for a lot of reasons, for a lot of us, and not just because of COVID. A lot of stuff happened, but not all of it was bad. The racial tension that sort of bubbled to the surface over the summer after the intolerable death of George Floyd was certainly hard, no matter your race. But the fact that we started having more deep conversations about race is a good thing. Racism is real, anti-Blackness is real, it's unacceptable, and it does need to be talked about. It's gonna be uncomfortable. This is a very personal topic for me as a mixed race, non-Black person of color, and I don't want to make this video about me, so I will save some of the personal bits for the end, but it was important that I make a video. I wanted to do it since last summer, but I didn't quite know how, and I thought that today, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, would be appropriate. One of the ways that I've really tried to investigate racism within myself is through my mindfulness journey. It's extremely relevant, and it's a tool that can be used with racism, politics, other social justice issues, and really just about any tough question in life. This month, in this series, if you've been watching it, you know I've been talking about mindfulness as it relates to food, nutrition, and diet, but I thought that this series could be the right time to also share some thoughts and ideas about how to approach racism, and specifically how we can use mindfulness to have more productive conversations about race and racism. In fact, there have been some studies that actually show mindfulness can reduce implicit bias too, and I'm going to talk about those as well. As a disclaimer, I am a human and thereby flawed and imperfect. I make many mistakes, and while I'm going to do my best to be mindful and aware during this conversation with you now, I may say something incorrectly. I've learned a lot this past year looking at racism within myself, and I think it's important that we be willing to make mistakes so that we can learn. That being said, I'm going into this video with a lot of intention and really trying to show up in the best way that I can today, learning more so that I can show up better tomorrow. Also, this is only one video, so I could only fit so much into it. I had to be discerning about where to start with talking about this issue on my channel. One of my classes in grad school last year was about mindfulness and social activism, and so I'm going to share some of what I've learned and what's helped me. And then I've also included many additional resources in the course content for today, which is all linked in the description box, and it's free like the rest of the series. Okay, so mindfulness and racism. If you have been going along with the course this month, you are now familiar with mindfulness. I have been kind of shorthand defining it as the non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. We are going to unpack that a bit more, but I do want to acknowledge again that mindfulness stems from ancient Buddhist traditions, but it can be approached very secularly, and that's how I've integrated it into my life. But this is really what the Buddha's wisdom was all about, and his goal, and really any practicing Buddhist goal, is to relieve suffering of ourselves and others. The argument is essentially that whatever is happening right now is reality, and when we argue with reality, when we want things to be different than they are, we cause ourselves a lot of suffering. So mindfulness helps us learn to be okay right here in this moment and not cause ourselves more suffering by ruminating and reacting. Mindfulness, remember, is learning to respond rather than react out of habit and without awareness. It can only be accessed right here in this moment. So it is a moment-to-moment practice and a commitment. Now, racism is not gonna be solved in one video or one conversation or a protest. Unfortunately, it is a long haul social justice issue, and that means we have a lot of minutes, a lot of moments ahead of us confronting this, and we need to know how to be okay in those moments, or else we're never going to get anywhere. Because the second that racism is brought up, it's painful. Really, it's painful for everyone in the room, whether you're a victim or an unintentional perpetrator. And before we can get anywhere, we need to be able to stay in the room. So that is the first reason mindfulness is important. It helps us learn to be okay right now. Racism is also, it's an individual issue but it's also a relational and a collective issue. It's very layered, and there's no linear way through this issue. But to get through it, we have to be willing to talk to our families, talk to friends, talk to people we don't know or necessarily like or agree with, both in person and online. When racism gets brought up, there's typically a lot of anger, and anger is most often reactive. When we are so caught up in reacting, we can't see clearly. Now, anger can be a helpful emotion, but we have to transform the energy of it to really be helpful. We can't force people to be the way we want them to be. So no matter how angry we get, we need to learn to talk to each other. Mindfulness also encourages what I'm going to call wise speech, which is, as you'd guess, important if we're going to be talking. So unwise speech is harmful. It takes us further away from whoever we're talking to rather than bringing us closer. And with any social justice issue, the goal is to come together. And with any controversial subject matter, the goal is to speak to each other from a place of mutual understanding, even if we disagree. The qualities of wise speech are truthfulness, helpfulness, kindness or goodwill, and appropriateness. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be someone's BFF or act fakely nice to them, but rather it means being considerate of our words, very considerate of who we are saying something to, as well as, the what, where, when, why, and how we are saying something. This wise speech includes others, but it also includes ourselves. So we should notice the tone that we take with ourselves. And a huge part of mindfulness is, remember, that non-judgmental component. If we are judging others, or if we're judging ourselves, we can't see clearly or make level-headed decisions. It serves us to speak to ourselves with those same qualities of wise speech: truthful, helpful, kind, and appropriate. If you wouldn't say it to your best friend, don't say it to yourself, and don't say it to your enemy either. More on enemies coming. Also in line with non-judgment is our views. Now, we all have views about social justice issues, politics, lifestyle choices, whatever it may be, but we have to remember that our views are just that. They're ours. Our view, my view, is not the only view. And if we are reactive about our view, and if we are extremely attached to our view as the right way, that's a judgment. And we can't see clearly. Remember, non-judgment. To see clearly, we need awareness. And that is the additional piece of the mindfulness puzzle. We need to be aware of our views, aware of the fact that they are our views, and we need to be aware of other views, but not just the views of others, but why they have those views. In the course content today, I included an exercise from one of the books I read. It's called The Engaged Spiritual Life. And the exercise is about inquiring into your own attachment to your views. It's easy to think we aren't attached, but if we feel defensive, then it's kind of a good sign that there's some attachment there. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's human nature, especially when it's something as heated and personal as race. We've talked a lot this month about conditioning, and that is what racism really is. We have been conditioned by people we know, by society, culture, marketing. All these things have sometimes subtly and sometimes overtly conditioned us to have biases. And sometimes, unfortunately, these biases are around race and color, and no human is immune to that. So the tough question of racism is not about, am I racist or not? Everyone is conditioned. If you have a single preference in life, it's from conditioning. The question is not, am I racist or am I not racist, but rather, how am I racist? To ask that question is hard. It's hard to stay in the room. It's hard to stay with myself. All I want to do when I ask that question is escape and say, no, I'm not racist, and here's how, and let me prove it to the world so I can be free of this. But unfortunately, that's not how change is going to happen. If you really care about racism and equality, we all have to ask ourselves that question. Not just white people, everyone. Black people should ask themselves, brown people, mixed people like me, people who have committed micro or macroaggressions, and those who have experienced them. Now, notice how I said we should be asking ourselves. I think this is one area that's been pretty overlooked with social media. As much as social media has done good for social justice movements in terms of exposure and delivering information, we cannot do this introspective work online. It has to start at home with ourselves. We need to have conversations with others, but those need to be woven in conversations we have with ourselves. We need to ask ourselves, And then we need to go talk to others and find out, am I seeing clearly? What am I missing? Then we got to go back and check in with ourselves and continue to process and grow. So as an example, Christian and I make it a point to talk to each other about some of these uncomfortable topics, knowing though that it's a safe space for us where we're not going to judge each other for what we may not yet have awareness around. So for myself, having this safe space to explore where both of our goals is to better understand ourselves and educate ourselves and understand what it is we haven't learned yet, that has encouraged me to keep trying to learn, knowing I have someone to talk about it with, even if I can't put into words in the exactly right, appropriate way yet. I think we all need a space like this where we can openly, verbally explore, and then we have to go back alone and think about it to refine our understanding. Now, unfortunately, this is not just about intellectually understanding racism is real. And this is another area where social media can't exactly help. We have to experience this introspective work in our own bodies and minds, not just remember facts or what's politically correct or appropriate. We have to learn for ourselves what equality looks like and means for others, for myself, what's my role in achieving equality, and what's been perhaps my unconscious role in preventing it. Because some of these actions I've taken may be unconscious, especially if I am someone who thinks I believe in equality and I'm not racist. It's really important that we be aware of what's called implicit bias. So let's unpack implicit bias. Thoughts or feelings are implicit if we are unaware of them or if we're mistaken about them. A bias is a preference for or an aversion to something, usually a person or a group of people. So implicit bias, putting that together, is having an attitude toward people or stereotyping without the conscious knowledge that we're doing it. These implicit beliefs can disagree with our consciously held views. That would be our explicit bias. So if I say, I am not biased against Black people, this is an explicit view that I have about myself. But here's the thing. Research shows that our self-reported attitudes do not often match up with our implicit biases. What does that mean? Now, first thing, it means you're human, because everybody has biases and preferences. No one is immune. And remember, it is the nature of our minds to keep doing what it's always done, and we don't have awareness of it. But this also means that even if we know we don't want to be racist, and even if we intellectually believe all people should be equal, we still have experienced conditioning subconsciously that affects our actions, which then affects other people. The fact that neuroplasticity is a thing, okay, the fact that you can change your brain, which is really what this series is all about, is a game changer, not only to neuroscience and health as we've been talking about it, but with social justice issues. Studies have shown that mindfulness practices, which help encourage plasticity in the brain and make it possible for us to rewire those connections, that can actually reduce implicit bias. Now, if you haven't taken the Harvard Race IAT, which is the implicit association test, take it, it's free. I will link it below. It takes about 10 minutes and it essentially tests your subconscious cognitive processing. And there are IATs for gender, sexuality, religion, age, there's tons of them. And you can get a sense for what might be going on subconsciously. Now, this test can create a lot of anxiety. So if you take it and when you get your results, notice your reaction. Are you defensive? Are you proud? Are you sad? Bring mindfulness to the experience of taking the test, because probably you're going to be sweaty and nervous. Mindfulness is non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. Bring that in. There's no right answer with these tests. Now, I know people who ended up with, moderate to strong preference for Black faces, and I know a lot of people that ended up with slight, moderate, or strong preference for white faces. Even people that are not white ended up with that. Now, which is better, a preference of any strength toward white or toward Black? The answer is neither. Both are preferences, and both point to bias and racism and conditioning. The ideal, which we're humans, so we're flawed, but the ideal would be to not have an automatic preference. But even if that is your result here, it doesn't mean you should consider yourself off the hook. We all need to take a look. I mentioned a few studies have been done showing mindfulness can reduce implicit bias. One study, which I will link in the materials if you want to read the full paper, it looked at bias against Black people and people who are homeless and found that mindfulness reduced implicit bias against both. It went from neutral to positive attitudes toward Black people, and it went from negative to neutral attitudes for unhoused people. It's important that they looked at both Black and unhoused people because it's a great example of how socially and culturally it's more appropriate to have the view I'm not, or I should not be biased against Black people, and Black people are equal to me. We know that we should think that, which is why the starting point for Black people, I think, is more neutral. But with people experiencing homelessness, it's more socially accepted to have a negative view toward them. Of course, it's not acceptable. The truth is, and the ultimate goal is, that every human is equal, but our societal and cultural views and norms condition us. It is subconscious. Another thing important about this study, and I love this, is they used a mindfulness meditation that's called Lovingkindness. It's a form of compassion meditation, and I actually included a guided audio in the materials for today if you want to try it out. But so the groups that saw a reduced implicit bias with Black people and unhoused people, they practiced this style of meditation for 6 weeks. Now they also had 2 additional groups. They had a control group, that didn't do any meditation at all. And then they had another group called a discussion group. And that group learned about the meditation, they discussed it intellectually, but they didn't actually practice the meditation. And what they found, this is mind-blowing, was the people who discussed the practice did not reduce any bias, just like the control group. The only people who reduced their bias were those who practiced the meditation for themselves. So all of this points to what I said earlier, simply having an understanding intellectually of what is racist or not, or how it should or shouldn't be, it doesn't do anything. So just posting resources on social media and reposting Black creators' work, it's great to spread awareness, keep doing it, but it is not going to change us deeply. Social media reflects our explicit belief that we put out into the world and what we believe about ourselves, but it doesn't express our implicit beliefs. We can only change our implicit beliefs if we turn inward and ask those questions at a deep emotional and really a neurophysiological sense, where we rewire our brains. There is another great book, which I will link in the resources. It's called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem, and he talks about racialized trauma and how we have held on to this trauma in our bodies for generations, whether we are white or Black, and he even talks about police officers. But he talks about how unconsciously this racism is there from generations before us, and yet it is still ours to deal with. He uses a lot of great mindfulness exercises that resonated with me, like when you're around people who look different than you, whether it's race, gender, age, whatever, stop and notice, how does your body feel? Where and how are you holding tension? So when I've tuned into my body in an environment, and I've practiced this many times at this point, I personally have noticed that I tense up around people who are not American. And it doesn't matter if they're white, Black, or brown. And what I've explored, and what I believe the reason to be, is Americans, from my experience, have been the least likely to look at me and go, "You're not white." So, like I said, I don't want to make this video too much about me, so I will touch on it at the end a little bit, but essentially I spent a lot of my life trying to hide the fact that I'm mixed and hide behind, or unfortunately be protected by, my lighter skin tone. And my experiences showed me early on that people from other countries, no matter the color of their skin, tended to be more aware culturally. And those are the people who, would look at me and go, "What are you, by the way? You're not just white, are you?" But Americans could never tell. So when non-Americans would ask me that, it was threatening because they challenged me hiding. I really felt that in my body, that threatening experience. My shoulders lift and tighten and my hands get warm and sweaty. And these bodily signals are really something we can learn a lot from. But if we don't intentionally pay attention to them, we do them unknowingly. So right now you might be like, I don't tense up around Black people or whatever, but have you ever been in a group of Black people and paid attention to what happens to your body? So you can see how each of us have to do this work of tuning into our bodies on our own. We might learn from anecdotes and other people's experiences, but we can't change our personal implicit biases without going to the deep roots in ourselves. Just like if you're hungry, I can't eat the food to fuel you. In the same way, I can't feel your body for you. You have to do this work, and you are the only one that can transform yourself. Educating ourselves historically and culturally is crucial, but the transformative work is not about memorizing facts. It's about learning to see ourselves clearly and acknowledge, I've been conditioned, and then feel what that really feels like. And can I be curious about that rather than judgmental? Because judgment doesn't get us anywhere. I'm gonna link a few more studies and articles about implicit bias and mindfulness in the materials as well. I could go on and on and on, but the last piece that I wanted to touch on in this video that has been really valuable for me personally with mindfulness, and it's not only helped me to let go of my views, but also see how my views have held me back. So I mentioned earlier, we all have views and we can cling to our views, and it's important to be willing to see other people's views. But the problem with views inherently is if I have mine and you have yours, then I have to be in opposition with you to maintain that view. And that makes for a lot of resistance and anger and reactiveness and hatred. Now, this might seem counterintuitive to some of you. I know last summer when the racial tension exploded on social media, so many people were so eager to go, I'm on this side. Which side are you on? Either you're with me or you're against me. It becomes, I'm this type of person, someone who's not racist, and you are this type of person, someone who is racist. This is what mindfulness has helped me call duality. It's an us versus them mentality, me versus you. I'm good, you're bad. A social activist's goal is to come together with our opponent. Who better expressed that through their work than Martin Luther King Jr.? Do we get closer by creating a divide of me versus you? No. Martin Luther King Jr. recognized that his anger was rooted in fear and pain, but so was his opponent's anger. Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, these remarkable and transformative leaders viewed their enemies as potential friends, and their goal was to reach reconciliation. It's not about cooperating with injustice or being okay with maltreatment. There is a moral right and wrong, but when we identify ourselves as being, I'm a part of the moral right, and we see other people as a part of the moral wrong, we just deepen the divide between us. And the further we get, the less we can see clearly. There's less chance of bringing us back together. If we want equality, if we really want true equality, we want to bring people closer together, we have to be willing to get to know our opponent. If we want others to hear what we have to say, we have to be willing to stop and listen. We cannot force other people to believe anything. When has that ever worked? Has anyone ever forced you to actually believe something? You need to decide for yourself what you believe in order for it to be real. So a few reflections from Rothberg's Engaged Spiritual Life book that I encourage you to sit down and journal about on your own are, number one, how are both parties suffering? It may stem from hatred, fear, anger, grief, depression on both sides. Can you see that in both sides? Number two, am I fixating on a particular quality of my opponent? So am I fixating on their greed, their ignorance, their cruelty? Those things may exist, but are there any other qualities that make up that person that I'm overlooking? Maybe they have some good qualities, right? Are they defined by their hatred? The third question, and I think this has been one of the most eye-opening for me, is how am I like my opponent? Do we share any of those negative qualities? How am I greedy, self-centered, aggressive? This is more explicit exploration than implicit, because explicitly, most of us will say other races aren't my opponent. But if I'm angry at a person who is racist or hateful, maybe that person is the opponent I'm working with in this exploration. I have to stop and see, okay, I'm angry about their hatred toward others, but am I also building hatred in myself toward them? Politics is a great example of this because it's easy and socially appropriate to create the us versus them mentality. So the last question I would leave you to reflect on is it possible that I'm not totally right about this? Am I missing something in the rigidity of my views and what am I attached to there. Now, maybe you're not wrong, but are you not totally right? At the end of the day, we're all people, and most of our reactive anger and our actions are rooted in fear and pain. We all want to be free of suffering. Yes, there are actions that are good and bad, and some actions are explicitly harmful, hateful, and must not be tolerated. I am not suggesting we stand by passively and do nothing, but the danger is thinking there are entirely good or bad guys. Every person is capable of change, and if you don't believe that, then what are you fighting for? We are all ultimately the same. And I know this is not what society teaches us, but if we continue to think I'm right and you're wrong, we're just going to maintain that divide. So I leave you with these reflections because, again, I can't do this work for you. I can't teach you what I've learned as I've been doing this work, because it is a felt sense experience that each individual has to undergo. See for yourself and try to be kind to yourself and others. That's what mindfulness is all about. Really, the fact that now we are finally having these conversations is good for everyone, because if we take it seriously, then it means we actually prioritize this, life work that really helps each of us live more meaningfully too. As I mentioned, racism, it's a complex, layered issue. I've mostly focused on racism at the individual level and a little bit on the relational level, but we also have to work to understand the historical context of racism and the realities of systemic racism in this country and across the world. There's no way for me to tackle everything in this video, and frankly, I'm still learning, but I will be including some of the resources I've been turning to in the description. And if you want me to talk more about this on the channel, let me know. I have a lot to say, clearly, but I also know that's not why you came to this channel necessarily. So I want to honor that too and find a balance that best serves everyone. But this is really personal to me. As I mentioned, I'm a mixed person. My mom is white and my dad is South Asian. He was born in Pakistan. My grandparents were from India, and I grew up very confused about my identity. Again, my goal is not to make this video about me, but I will share a little for those interested, because the context of who's speaking matters, right? The tipping point for me was in middle school on 9/11, September 11th, 2001. When that happened, I went into school on September 12th and I was called a terrorist. And that, I didn't realize before then that anybody had a problem with Muslims or, Middle Eastern people. And that was the day that I realized I was safer being white. And I immediately realized the privilege of my lighter skin tone, and I leaned into it, and I pretty much just tried to exist pretending I was white. But my experience didn't reflect that. My name is clearly Middle Eastern, and I just, I had a felt sense in my body my whole life that I was always hyper aware of every race that was in the room with me, because I was trying to not be found out. And so as a young adult, I really struggled with my identity and how to show up. And that's true here on YouTube too. I really wanted to be white because it felt safer. But I do see now that I am what I am, and I'm not ashamed. I'm actually really grateful for my heritage and my perspective, because I was able to have the experience of both being white and brown, and culturally to experience both, and to have a sense of what it feels like to be afraid of people and for people to be afraid of me. And that fear did condition me. I have both unconsciously committed and explicitly been a victim of microaggressions. Of course, I have no idea what it's like to be Black in America, but I have seriously reflected on it and the challenges and injustices that it carries. Mindfulness has shown me that while I can learn from all of this conditioning, it's not my fault. But just because it's not my fault, just because I didn't ask for the conditioning doesn't mean I don't have to take responsibility. I do, because it's there. And mindfulness is how I am taking a look. So however you choose to take a look, whether mindfulness is a support that resonates with you or not, it's fine, but please do be willing to take a look. This is really important to the world, and a lot of people really need your help, and you being willing to take a look does help, so thank you. I encourage you and ask you to comment below, share your experiences, start and engage in conversations, but I also ask that you keep wise speech in mind. So be really intentional about your words online, and use that guide I shared as a reminder. Before you press send, ask, is it truthful? Is it helpful? Is it out of kindness or goodwill? And is it appropriate? And if it's all four of those things, then press send. If we practice just this one aspect of mindfulness, we would have so much more productive conversations. If you want more content like this, or if you found it useful and think someone else would and want to share it, that would be amazing. I will be back tomorrow with another, regular video from our food freedom content. So this is the only kind of digression for the month. We'll be back to food and health tomorrow, but I do appreciate you being willing to be here and go through this video, and just the fact that you watched this video, clearly you're curious enough to try and help. So thanks so much. I'll see you tomorrow.